Hello everyone, in today's video I'm going to touch on a topic that is quite popular, but not many know how to play this correctly. It's the Caro Kann defense, as you can read below me, and the idea is that this is one of the most popular chess openings with black, and I would like to teach you how to play it. Instead of paying a lot, I don't know, $20 on a chessable course, this is going to be a crash course that you're going to take, and then you are not even going to need another tutorial anymore because there are a lot of sublines, but you aren't going to play against them. So the Caro Kann basically is e4 and then the move c6. This move c6 enables the move d5 afterwards, and we're going to take a look at one of the most popular variation, and this is going to be the advanced variation. Obviously, the advanced variation means that this pawn is advanced over here, but that's not the only variation we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about all the mainstream variation, like the Briar variation, the exchange variation, and I'm going to talk about the fantasy variation as well, so you're not going to be able to fall for any tricks that your opponent may have. So here there are two variations you can play: the Botvinnik Karl's variation, which is kind of fighting for this pawn over here, and then taking the center, which is kind of a worse French defense. But I also recommend this variation, which is much better. Develop the bishop, because the reason this is better is that the fact that in the French variation, you have in the French opening, in French defense, you have this bad bishop over here, and it's sort of the same setup. After something like this, it's precisely the same setup that you have before. So I don't recommend that. As I said, I think bishop to f5 is a variation that you should go for, and this is quite simpler. We get a few developing moves, right? Okay, if we get the developing move queen, bishop to d3, you're going to take, and then queen takes d3 is the reason you have to play e6 now. Okay, you have exchanged the bishops, and now the reason you have to play e6 is that after a developing move like with the knight or whatever, you're going to get e6 from your opponent. And what does this do? Well, you can take, and now this diagonal is open to attacks, and you're going to get overrun pretty quickly. But that is not even as bad as some other developing moves like bringing the queen out, because now here you are getting attacked even more quickly as the knight can jump in here. And you're lucky that this isn't actually a checkmate. And I'm talking about this variation because let's say a random move. This would be straight up almost checkmate, and the bishop over here, if you hadn't traded that off, there are variations in which you are going to have this specific case right here where you can sacrifice the bishop. Like if I were to spawn in a bishop here, sacrifice the bishop, takes with the pawn, and it's going to be checkmate. But that's another variation. So takes, and as I said, e6, very important move. Otherwise, your opponent's going to sacrifice a pawn, and you don't want that at all. It's very complicated. It's difficult to defend, and after something like this, they're going to develop the knight. And now you simply play this move c5. c5 backed up by the bishop is fighting for the center. You most usually get this move c3, reinforcing, and you don't hurry to take or to push, because pushing is simply going to be met by moving the queen away. I'm sorry, here is the better square because it doesn't block any development. And very soon your opponent is going to play b3, and your pawn structure is going to be pretty wacky. So I don't really want that. As I said, you're going to develop your knight, setting even more pressure over here. And now you might see this move. Okay, this move is a counter attack, right? Okay, so you're lucky that you have one scenario here, because you could take, you could push, but as I said, push is not really that good. If we ask Stockfish, pushing is actually better for the opponent, but you could push as well. You could take, but the variation that I want to teach you is to go queen to b6. This is very tricky because if the opponent takes, you're simply going to take back, and after something like this, your queen is pretty active, you can simply develop the knight, and after something like this, well, you could get this move g4, which is interesting, but no, g4, I'm talking correctly, which is pretty interesting, but you can just drop back, and then this pawn structure is kind of wacky as well. You could knock on the door like this, and then jump in here, and it's pretty easy for black to make advancements over there. So you're just going to develop, and after a few moves, you're simply going to have a clean position. You can place your rook on c8, and this position is actually just normal. It's a normal position that you want to get out of the opening. You don't want to be worse, you actually want to be better. And if you ask Stockfish if anyone is better, it's black here. Okay, I've covered what happens after they develop the bishop, but for instance, they develop the knight, either a knight, or they can also play some variation like this variation with f4. It's a more, I don't know, defensive variation for white, but also a bit aggressive at the same time. I know it probably doesn't make sense, but if you take a look at this, now this pawn is reinforcing in the center, and it does help the center more as this is going to be stable for longer. But don't not many people actually go for this because this diagonal gets weakened, and you actually want to castle on that side as well. I'm going to keep it shorter because this much yapping is going to be too much in depth and you're not really going to need this. You're going to figure it out in your game as well. It's just important for you to not blunder. After they develop the knight, you're just going to push e6 again, and you're going to get a few developing moves. And obviously, if they ever take here, you take back. And trading like this would be bad for the white position because this is actually easy to target, and now black may have quite some problems defending it. And yeah, you're going to have a fun time playing such a game because you can just develop your pieces, castle your king to safety, bring your rook to c8 as well, and you're going to be able to either start an attack on that side or pressure this pawn over here with a few moves. And I know these arrows may be a bit, I don't know, irritating, or maybe you don't really realize what these arrows are doing, but I'm just trying to keep it short over here, not play every variation out. Okay, let's jump into the next variation, right? Okay, we have the Tartakower variation. The Tartakower would basically be developing the knight while still keeping these two pawns in the center. And now you're just going to take stakes, develop the knight, and now after they take, you're just simply going to take back. This variation is considered good by Stockfish because these pawns actually help you protect the king. And if you think about it, this pawn is actually doing a lot of work over here if they ever want to attack, because it's holding some very valuable squares. Another variation that was played in the past is this variation, and you just develop the knight over here, play e6 maybe, and then develop all your pieces. It's sort of a more safer variation. This is called the classical variation, but the Tartakower is superior according to Stockfish, but it's actually just about, I don't know, maybe 0.3 better. It doesn't really make a difference, especially at most people's level. And yeah, here you're just going to get a few developing moves, and let's say you get some annoying move. Some people just play this in order to annoy you. Well, you're just simply going to wait to see where they place their things, and now you're simply going to castle as well. Like if they were to move the bishop again, that's why I said wait. You're not hesitating. You're not hurrying to move this bishop. You're actually hesitating because you can sort of see that if they move the bishop back by any chance, you could develop your bishop. So it's better to develop the light squared bishop first. But you could argue for this bishop as well, as then you could pin the knight. But this tends to be annoying as well. I'm going to go into another variation. As in the Tartakower, as I said, you just trade. But let me show you a trick first, because this tends to be very annoying for a lot of Caro Kann players, and you have to be careful as well. This is the Alien Gambit. The Alien Gambit, how does it work? The Alien Gambit is after you play the move h6, or not even the move h6, it simply after the move knight to g5. Knight to g5 threatens to sacrifice the knight, and you think, okay, they sacrifice the knight for a pawn, that's actually pretty bad for them. Well, they just developed the knight over here, and it's actually getting pretty dangerous. As you can see, you have poked a lot of holes in this position, and it's pretty easy to get attacked on the light squares. So you have to be careful. And the correct move here is c5, recommended by the engine. And let's actually run the engine in order to be more accurate. So you see c5 by the engine, and then after they attack you, you're going to block with the pawn. Very important, blocking with the bishop is an inaccuracy. Okay, let's go by the most common move actually, because going by the Stockfish moves is not going to help us that much, because it's about the same idea. If they go here, you're going to take and sort of destabilize the center for them. So now, after that, you're going to be able to develop your knight. This bishop still protects over here, but we're going to go by this now. So we get this, which is the most common move, And now actually a lot of people play c3 in order to stabilize the center, which is not a bad move particularly, but they could be more accurate with castling. Okay, and after castling, the most common move is queen takes d4. Queen takes d4 is accurate, as you can see, Stockfish says it's good, but playing here is sort of threatening the center over here. As you can see, there is attacking this and that. And after something like this, which doesn't really happen quite often. So we would get knight to g6, and after knight to g6, you can actually sacrifice your rook here. Why? Because you've already given that up, and the knight is not going to get out. So now you've stabilized the center over here, and you're probably going to be able to push e6 at some point after e5 at some point after you get rid of the bishop somehow. If that is not possible, it doesn't really matter as this is protected anyways. And after something like this, you would just take. And you have two knights for a rook, which is completely dominant if you think about it. You just have to be careful to not get overrun over here. So if you get something like this, you're simply gonna block this attack by the bishop, and you're going to be completely fine. Let me sum it up once again because it took a longer time to explain. After they sacrifice their knight, you're going to take and push c5. They're going to give a check, which is actually the most common move, but they could actually go over here as well, which is actually, I think, in another variation. It's actually, I think it's after this to go here. But if that happens, which is actually the fourth most common move, you just take and just destabilize the center, and as you can see, all attacks are now getting weaker because you have stabilized in the center, and a strong center is helping the attacking side. And even though it seems like you're getting attacked, the white king is actually in trouble, and you're just going to get pretty straightforward developing moves, and you are simply gonna be able to trade off since you're up material and hopefully win the game. Let me jump into another variation quickly to not make this video 30 minutes long. And yeah, this is the alien gambit as well. Like, this could initiate the Tartakower or the alien gambit as well. But let me jump into another variation. Okay, many people develop the knight here. And let me turn off Stockfish. We don't need Stockfish for basic theory. So you push d5 as always. This is the reason you're playing d5 is that it's backed by the move c6. And it's sort of like the, uh, what is it called? The Scandinavian defense, but you sort of already have a pawn over there. The Scandinavian defense, if you don't know, it's this. And now, I mean, this would sort of be the same position, but you would be able to take with the pawn in the Caro Kann, right? Okay, so we get knight develops, takes, takes. Okay, we have a lot of moves here, but most of them are going to be straight up developing moves. Another variation is that after here, they're simply going to try to annoy your bishop, but I'm going to show you that in another transposition, right? So here you most likely have to develop the bishop first, because if you develop the knight, you're going to see this annoying move h3. And if you see this annoying move h3, how are you developing your bishop? You have to put it here, but usually you just play e6, develop this first, and work around with the bishop later. But this is quite more annoying, that's why I recommend to develop the bishop here. And even if he attacks you, which is actually a variation I'm facing quite often, I don't know about your elo range. When I was in your elo range, I mean, I'm talking 1000 to 1500, 1600, 700. I wasn't facing this very often, but now a lot of people are liking to go here. Now, you could take, but I don't really like taking, because I developed the knight. And if they take here, you're just going to take back with the h-pawn. And this pawn is going to be particularly weak in the future. And if the queen ever moves off, you would be able to take over here, because after takes, 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 you know what I mean. So it's very easy to go wrong. And here you're just going to play the move e6, develop the bishop. And you're probably going to wait to castle. And let me show you real quick. We get this move c3, which is the most common move. And now after something like this, you're simply going to develop the bishop to whatever square. It doesn't really matter. They could also pin you as well, but you still go here. And this, yeah, I mean, doesn't matter. As I said, I mean, I would play queen to b6 here, targeting that pawn, and it's the same idea as before. A lot of yapping, I know, but this is theory in chess, so you have to keep the attention span going. So what else? I mean, straightforward developing moves, as I said. When they develop the knight, you develop your bishop, and otherwise you don't really have to know exact orders. You can't really go that wrong in the Caro Kann. As I said, something like this you never take because this could get very annoying very easily for you, and you don't really want that to happen. And you also don't have any better squares. If you go here, they still take, and if you go back, they still take. So that doesn't work. So you never take here. You usually just play e6. Knight takes e5 is by definition the most. What? Knight takes e5 is the most common move in this particular variation that I just showed you, but it has white with a 62% win rate. And can I see the average elo? I'm not sure. The average elo is 1600, so it's insane that the average elo is 1600 for this. I guess there are many bullet players that fall for this too, so I'm not exactly sure, but don't do this. Everything else that I'm showing has a much higher win percentage for black, especially this move ace e6 with a 60% win rate. Wow. Let's jump into another variation, which is the exchange variation. After they place two pawns in the center, you're going to go here, takes, and there are a lot of moves here. Usually they just develop, and as I said, this is very annoying. In the exchange variation, they used to play this, and if you look at the references over here, Lichess has some references, and we see 1999. There is a book where you can find this variation in 1999, and as you can see, this is a pretty old variation, but it's a pretty smart variation too. Why? Okay, you cannot develop your bishop, and this is the variation where I told you they're going to annoy your bishop, right? Okay, here you develop your knight, whatever knight doesn't really matter. And as you can see, you still cannot develop your bishop. You hope for them to go here. They don't, because then we land in the same spot. And after something like this, you simply have a normal developing position where you develop your knight, develop your bishop, and you're just going to be fine. What is the problem? Well, the problem is that they don't develop the knight first. They play this move h3. And as before, you aren't going to be able to develop your bishop to either of these squares, and it's kind of going to be a little bit more difficult for you to make a decision with the bishop. That sound was the Bundesliga calling upon me, but I need to make a video that is more important. So we get takes. I'm going to show you the Panov attack. The Panov attack is where they're going for this. You're certainly not going to take, at least not right away, because taking is going to allow them to develop the bishop, and they're going to have this pawn in the center, and the bishop could be annoying later on. I don't recommend you taking. You simply have to reinforce. Okay, there are variations where you reinforce with a knight. Why? Because reinforcing with a knight is simply going to allow you to develop your bishop later on, which is important. But you could reinforce like this, and you suddenly are in an exchange French variation. Not quite, because you don't have this pawn. But if they don't take here, and they're just going to develop, you're going to develop, and they develop, and you develop, and they develop, and you develop, and castle. And at some point, either they are going to take and you free up your bishop, or now you are actually going to take, because then they have to move the bishop twice. Okay, here you have a few um, ideas. One of them is a6, b5, and then you're just simply going to develop your bishop on this side of the board. And let me show you real quick, right? I'm just going to see develop b5, bishop to b3, and then this move bishop b7 is activating the bishop. And that's why these variations where you kind of don't allow your bishop to go for something like that, especially in the Panov attack, you have this idea with b6. After you take b6 and then a6 and then b5 with bishop b7, and you activate on that diagonal, which is actually pretty strong, and I have played it this many times before. This is what you need to know in the Panov attack, and I'm going to show you one more variation that comes to my head right now, and it's the fantasy variation. Okay, so we go for this, and the fantasy variation is called the fantasy variation because it is so creative and it's so dangerous. So there are many ways to go wrong in the fantasy variation. A nice idea is just to take, and after they take back, you have this beautiful move e5. Well, you may think, I just give a free pawn, and even though I cannot castle, it's not really that bad, because they can hang on to the pawn, and I can't really do much, right? No, that's not why you play e5. The reason you play e5 is that after they take, you are simply going to give this check with the queen. Why? Okay, let's see what happens if they go down. If they go down, you're going to take, and after something like this, you're simply going to develop your bishop, and they're probably going to kick you out, but now it's checkmate in one, so that is not going to happen, but you have a lot of advantage here as well, and it's actually pretty easy to go wrong with white. What happens if they go here? Well, you may ask, you give a check, they go back, you take, and what happens after they block with the queen? You're simply going to go here, you have a pretty active bishop. If they develop the knight, they're going to take that, so that doesn't happen. And you're simply going to develop, take this pawn, be a pawn up, and pretty much win the game. And another reason why you play this is that after they block, you instantly take this, and after they block, you take the rook, and there is simply nothing for them to trap your queen whatsoever, and you're simply going to easily have an advantage by being a rook up. Like, if you aren't fine with having a rook up, I mean, I don't know. This is a variation you tend to see, and let me actually watch the database because I was about to talk from my own experience, but let's see the move f3. The average elo is 1800, okay? The average elo being 1800 means that many people above 2000 play it and a few people below 2000. I would say that for me, I have begun facing this variation when I was around 1500, but it was by complete niche people and it was very, very rare. But now I'm tending to see it more often, and the idea is that it's not completely lost for white. It's actually fine because let me turn on off Stockfish. They are not going to take allowing this. They're simply going to develop the knight. And now developing the knight, as you can see, causes a few problems. Why does it cause a few problems? Well, because it attacks this, right? So you have to develop. Wait, do I develop? Yeah, I do develop. So you develop. Because there is a variation where we take two, but I like to develop this, and usually they go here as well. And now you just develop your knight. And the reason you don't develop the other knight, because this is the fantasy in the variation, they can sacrifice, and this is why the variation is so aggressive. It has so many traps, and after something like this, you are just completely gone because they take and take and take, and their attack is going to be so strong, and your king is cut off, and your development is so bad that you're going to have trouble. You're going to be in trouble. Simply put, takes castle, your king is cut off, you cannot develop your rook, you're developing your knight is kind of useless because they overrun you, and as you can see, this is not good for you. So what do you need to do? Develop the other knight to reinforce the pawn. Now if they would take, 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 this would come with a take like this, and if they would ever take, it's completely bad, so that doesn't happen. But yeah, they cannot sacrifice afterwards. Okay, what do you get? Castles. Now you can develop this knight. And this is where you have to be careful. There are two variations that I want to show you because I faced them and I have gone wrong, especially against very good players. When I could have gotten a pretty solid position and had a chance to win, I actually lost the game. Because, okay, now if you develop the bishop, you again are in trouble because this is a thing. This is a thing because now it's discovered check after they take, and you go back and you are completely in trouble. They take this, they are up two pawns that are overrunning your king. Your king cannot castle anymore, and your pieces are underdeveloped. You are gone. This is pretty much unplayable for you, right? So that's why you have to develop this knight after castling. Why am I telling you this? Well, because there's a variation where you cannot develop your knight. Why? Instead of castling, people go c3 here. Well, what is the idea of c3? I just develop the knight, attack this. You get queen to b3. Queen to b3 attacks this and this. What can it do? What can it do? Oh my days. What can it do? Queen to e7, protecting this is the best idea. And I was playing this against a 2400 rated player. It's a reasonably good player, and if I had known the theory, which I actually didn't know, and was surprising. Like, how do you know? How do you not know fantasy theory? Well, no one played c3 against me before, so that's why I'm showing you this. Okay, they take. What do? You're going to play rook to b8. You have to sort of do something. Well, they're going to take another pawn. They're up two pawns, and you can't really do anything in the center. If you ever take here, it's not really that good for you. This is already defended, as I said. And if you take this, you're going to get hit with castles, and you are simply going to lose the game as you cannot develop your bishop and castle your king to safety. What was that? Okay, you cannot castle your king to safety, and then you're in trouble. So what do you do there? If they ever play the move c3, you have to develop your bishop, because now after something like this, you are simply gonna be able to play queen to e7, and if they take rook b8, and then after this you don't develop your knight, but take first, and then you are going to be able to develop your knight, castle your king, and even though you're down 2 pawns, you're consolidating and you have a fine position. And this was the important variant that I was about to show you. And actually, this came up to be a pretty long guide, and it was 25 minutes. But now you are well suited to play against anything that is there to play against the Caro Kann. Play the Caro Kann. It's a good opening. It's a very good opening. And yeah, you're going to get a lot of tactical positions. You're going to get a few positional positions and a few locked positions. This is what you should expect. But if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. And see you next time.